introduction, and then we will study or understand in more details. Now, this is the very first unit of first block. This is British novel, and you'll come to understand that there are some basic issues which will help you know not just Tom Jones but also the subsequent novels prescribed. So we have to go through each section very critically and carefully. And let's start with it. The major objective of this unit is that the novel, which can be seen as dealing with questions, issues, as well as with the facts of history. There's 18th century, which is the century of prose as well as the rise of novel. So with both prose and the novel focusing on common ways of life, this is what is the most important part we must understand, focusing on the common ways of life. The novel emerged as a new and a significant mode of writing, becoming more than a means of providing entertainment. It became a means of radical questioning that would lead to a change in entrenched attitude. So, we'll start first with the novel as fiction. And this is unit one. Like I said, there are 4 units to be covered in the first hour, the rest 4 units to be covered in the second half. So this is the novel as a realistic form. Novel is a realistic form of literature, and this means that novels attempt to portray the real lives as closely as possible. They reflect actual social situations, settings, behaviors, and people. Rather than exploring abstract or mystical ideas as poetry often does, the novel focuses on the real world, the everyday life of people. Novel mirrors life and society. The term mirror here is important to understand because it implies that novel shows a reflection of real people, places, and issues. Unlike poetry and drama, where the writer may explore deep emotions or symbolic themes, novel avoids wild imagination or fantasy. They do not delve too much into the source mysteries or dark symbolic imagery. The novelist sticks to tangible realities, what people wear, how they speak, what towns look like, etc. The novelist works more like a social observer rather than a dreamer or a mystic. The imagination is present, but it's tied to the actual world. Now, when we study or when we read a novel, we are transported into another world. But it is a world that actually feels very realistic. This world has streets, towns, people, rules, customs, just like real life. Characters speak in their own voices and behave like real people. The novelist gives detailed descriptions not just of physical appearance but also of thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. The realism of the novel draws readers into its world. The reader becomes a kind of witness to the story and not just a passive observer. The novelist is not just telling a story, they are also commenting on society. They are judging the characters, their choices, what actions they're taking, what are the morals they have. They write with a purpose or some kind of a message. They select characters and situations consciously to make a point. The writer's bias and judgment are evident, but they show that the novelist is engaged in the world they are writing about. They have a social responsibility. They are a part of both actual society and the society in the novel. Hence, the novelist isn't neutral. They care deeply about the issues, people, and world they describe. This makes their storytelling authentic and passionate. Now, because of the novelist's detailed and committed approach, the reader automatically gets emotionally involved. The novel becomes immersive. The words do not just point to something imagery, they rather create a vivid picture in the reader's mind. This vividness makes the novel feel truthful, even if it is technically fiction. The novel's power lies in making the readers feel like the events are really happening, even though they are made up. Now, the writer distinguishes between realistic and imaginative or fictional. There's a contrast between the two, imaginative and fictional. Imaginative refers to something which is not grounded into reality. It is often symbolic, spiritual, or highly artistic. Words in imaginative works, like poetry, are used creatively. Just give me a second. So sorry for that. So, uh, words, yeah, I was talking about imagination, imaginative, which is not grounded into reality, which is often symbolic, which is spiritual, which is highly artistic, and words in imaginative works like poetry are used creatively, not just for telling facts. The writer here is creating a world out of pure imagination, not reflecting real life. Now, when we talk about something fictional, this goes even further. How? Fiction is not only imagined but completely invented with no necessary connection to the reality. Fiction, in this sense, is closer to a lie. It's deliberately unreal, though not in a deceptive or harmful way, but still it is a lie. Now, fiction isn't truth in the literal sense. It is fabricated, crafted, and yet it may still tell deep truths through invention. Here, when we go ahead to understand it, we will come to know that there is a comparison between the fiction writer and a liar. So let's understand. A liar is alert, he is sensitive to people, and always adjusting the story. Similarly, a novelist or fiction writer responds to what readers want or expect, creates a world that seems believable, even if invented, uses creative intelligence to shape stories that feel true. But unlike a liar who misleads, a novelist uses invention to express insight about human nature, society, dreams, and morals. Hence, the fiction writer is like a clever liar, not to deceive, but to engage, entertain, and enlighten. They use falsehoods to tell emotional or moral truths. Now, as we move ahead, we understand that fiction and the novel are closely associated, so much so that we often treat them as the same thing. For example, from the English novel Walter Allen's Argument, the novelist does not simply copy life or gather characters from real life. The author selects, shapes, and remakes real life impressions into fictional characters. These characters symbolize specific attitudes, values, or conflicts from the society in which the writer lived. Characters here are not carbon copies of real people, they are fictional embodiments of social impressions. For example, in Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, the characters, Allworthy, Weston, Tom, and Blifil, they reflect the attitudes, concerns, and the class structures of 18th century England. Reading about them will give you insight into that historical period. Now, as we move ahead to part two, we know this is where we talk about novel as historical document, but not history itself. Now, there is a central question here. Does fiction become so closely tied to real life that it actually starts to look like history? Now, how fiction resembles history? Novels give up vivid portraits of people and places from a specific period. They reflect the social structures, customs, and moral values of the time. In this way, fiction becomes significant history, not factual history, but emotionally and morally truthful. Walter Allen notes that before the novel, there were historical accounts like Clarendon's history of the rebellion, travel and adventures writing like Dampier's A New Voyage Round the World. These works were all non fictional, but they influenced the development of the novel as a form that imitates life. Novel grew out of realistic documentation of life, travelogues, memoirs, and historical records laid the groundwork. Moving ahead, there's a key difference between history and fiction. Despite all similarities, there are essential differences between history and the novel. History is a continuous process, it has no definite beginning or end. It is shaped by actions of many over time, tries to be objective, sticking to known facts. Any moral or lesson is left for the reader to interpret, subject to interpretation, contradiction, and debate. Where we talk about novel, we know that novel has a clear beginning and ending selected by the author. The author controls the narrative, decides what to show and what not to show. The events in a novel are designed to deliver a particular message, theme, or moral. It reflects the author's personal understanding of society, not an official or collective view. Hence, history is an evolving truth interpreted through facts. A novel is a crafted truth shaped by one mind to present a specific understanding. Now, why the ending matters in a novel? In a novel, ending happens to be the most significant part. Why? Because the ending reveals the moral or lesson the author wanted to deliver. It is a point where the meaning of the entire story comes together. The author consciously shapes the events towards this ending, unlike a historian who must stick to what actually happened. In fiction, the ending gives closure and clarity, suggesting a moral theme or insight into the society and its values. This makes the novel somewhat like a fable. It may be invented, but it teaches something true about human life. History too can offer lessons, but those lessons are not direct or deliberate. If a historian tries to emphasize a moral too strongly, then risk being seen as biased. Historians are expected to be objective, neutral, and truthful to facts. Interpretation of history vary. Two historians may draw opposite conclusions from the same events. Hence, fiction allows bias and emotion because it's personal and imaginative. History discourages personal biases because it claims to record real events. A novel is entirely an author's creation. The writer chooses when to start and end the story. They have total creative control. They can delay writing, abandon the idea, take any direction. Now, this makes fiction an intentional and constructed form, unlike the unfolding nature of history. The author of a novel shapes reality as they wish, offering a version of the world that's emotionally, morally, and socially significant. Then we come to the next section, evolution of the novel. And what does this section talk about? This section deals with how the novel came into being, especially in England, and it critically examines some common assumptions made by literary historians. It questions the validity of tracing the novel's origins solely through literary works or imagination, and insists on considering broader historical forces like economic and political developments. So, um, the prose connection, the idea in the books that we are going to understand is that the prose works of the earlier period can be clearly linked up with the novel in the 18th century. The common point between the two seems to be the prose. Some literary historians say, look, these early writings are prose and so are novels, so one must have led to the another. The author here disagrees, saying prose is not enough to find or trace the novel. Just because both early stories and novels are written in prose does not mean one directly produced the other. The novel is more than just a prose narrative, it involves realistic settings, social issues, individual psychology, and a moral or historical worldview. Stories about rogues or vagabonds, people exploring new places, are always exciting and popular. These were early forms of entertainment, often involving curiosity, travel, and surprise. But they lacked moral complexity and social grounding, which are essential in modern novel. Many fictional works across Europe created filled with magic and fantasy. The goal was simply to entertain, not to represent life.
I seen your video. I will visit നന്നായിട്ടുണ്ട് കാണാൻ ഇതാണ് well.
I request to be please muted. Mr. Sanjeev, Mr. Sanjeev, if I'm audible to you, Mr. Sanjeev, would you like to mute? Yeah, thank you so much. So, um, I think I was talking about the early forms of entertainment, stories about rogues and vagabonds, which are early forms of entertainment, and they have evolved through curiosity, travel, and surprise. But what they lack was moral complexity and social grounding, which are essential in modern novel. Many fictional works across Europe created imaginary worlds filled with magic and fantasy. Their goals was simply to entertain and not to represent life. Though they helped shape storytelling, they don't explain the realistic, socially rooted nature of the modern problem. Now, what is the problem here? All these origins are too literary and imaginative. They do not explain how and why the novel became such a grounded reality and socially aware form. The real issue or the misunderstanding of literary history, the idea here is that literature develops only from other literature, that there is a chain of influence, or that philosophy alone shapes writer's mind and creates new literature. This is what the author critiques. However, the author insists that we must understand literature in relation to broader history, including economic and political events as well. The emergence of the novel in the 18th century is tied to real historical shifts, urbanizations, the rise of middle class, new ideas of individualism, the growth of literacy, etc. A true literary history must be grounded in the actual social, economic, and political conditions of the time, and not just in the works of previous writers or philosophers. The novel cannot be explained only by looking at earlier prose, travel stories, or fantasies. Neither it can be fully explained by philosophical trends or purely literary influences. Instead, the novel must be understood as a product of its historical moment, the 18th century, with its new social classes, changing economies, and emerging individualism. Now, moving on to the next section, where there is a shift to prose in the 18th century, contexts and canonical works. 18th century marks a decisive shift in English literary history. The ascendancy of prose, particularly the novel, as a dominant literary form. While earlier periods valued poetry and drama, 18th century witnessed a movement through realism, individual experience, and social commentary, which prose was uniquely equipped to represent. The emergence of middle class readership, the rise of print culture, and the increasing complexity of urban and domestic life provided fertile ground for prose fiction. As a result, the century produced some of the earliest and most influential novels in English literature. The shift to prose cannot be understood in isolation, however, from the larger socio-economic transformations occurring in Britain during this time. There was a rise in the middle class, 18th century, that saw a growing middle class composed of merchants, professionals, and tradespeople. This new social group demanded reading material that was reflecting their values, experiences, and concerns rather than the courtly ideals typicals of earlier literature. There was an expansion of literacy as well. Education became more widespread, especially among women and the middle class. Literacy rates improved. New mass of readers emerged, eager for accessible and entertaining literature, written in plain vernacular prose. There was a growth in the publication industry. The printing press, the commercial publishing expanded rapidly. Magazines, newspapers, books became widely available, making prose writing a practical and profitable career. Publishers encouraged serialized fiction, making long prose narratives a marketable commodity. There was a decline in classical ideals, Enlightenment thinking growing or taking hold. The strict neoclassical rules of poetry began to lose dominance. Instead of imitating Greek and Roman models, writers sought to capture contemporary life and the complexities of the individual mind, better suited to prose narrative than verse. Some of the important works or figures during 18th century that transformed prose into a serious and artistically rich medium can be Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, and Jonathan Swift, Gulliver Travels, Samuel Richardson, Pamela and Clarissa, and of course Henry Fielding, Tom Jones, the one that we are going to study, Lawrence Sterne, Tristan Shandy, and on and on. The themes of 18th century prose fiction focused on mostly realism and everyday life, individual morality and psychology, consciousness, dilemmas of emotional life, social critics, where class structures, gender norms, hypocrisy, and power all were criticized. The prose is flexible enough to incorporate satire, realism, and sentimentality as required. Narrative authority. Authors began to assert their presence in the narrative through direct address, moral commentary, or comic asides, strengthening the relationship between writer and reader. So, as we come to the end of um, 18th century, aspects of novel, we understand here that there was a shift from poetry and drama to prose, which was merely stylistic, and there were works of Defoe, Swift, Richardson, Fielding, which established themselves as flexible, accessible, and richly layered form, capable of capturing both the surface events of life and deep emotional undercurrents. Now, coming to the novel, which has become a new literary term. The term novel occupies a central place in modern literary discourse, but its emergence as a distinct and a respected literary form is relatively recent. English tradition, the novel began to gain ground in 18th century, evolving in response to social, cultural, linguistic changes. Unlike older literary forms such as epic poetry, tragedy, romance, the novel was distinctly modern in both subject matter and style. As a literary term, novel came to signify a new form of narrative prose centered around social commentary, plausible plots, realistic characters. The novel originates from the Italian word novella, meaning a short new thing or tale. Initially, it referred to short prose narratives, especially those told for entertainment. During the Renaissance, Italian and French novellas circulated widely across Europe, influencing English storytelling. However, it was only in 18th century that the novel evolved into a long form, sustained narrative. So let's go to the next unit. The next unit is all about as we first read Tom Jones. We start here. As we first read Tom Jones, it's important to understand or to look at Tom's story. Tom Jones as a social commentary, definitely. The novel opens with the discovery of Tom as a Foundling, which immediately set the stage for discussions around social hierarchy, morality, and legitimacy. Tom's status as a bastard child challenges the conventional moral norms of the time, highlighting hypocrisy and societal prejudices. The role of Allworthy, another character. Allworthy's decision to adopt Tom, despite social objections, underscores his role as a symbol of benevolence and morality. His action not only contrasts sharply with the narrow mindedness of others, but also questions the legitimacy of inheritance based solely on birthright. There was a conflict with status quo throughout the novel. Characters like Bliffle, Square, Thwackum, and Square Weston represent various facets of traditional authority and privilege. Their opposition to Tom's free spirit nature and attempts to maintain the status quo creates obstacles for him. There is also some theme of Christianity and morality. Fielding uses Christianity not just as a religious backdrop but as a tool for critiquing social norms. All were these Christian principles which emphasize compassion and fairness, challenge the self serving interpretations of religion used by privileged classes to justify their positions. Fielding's narrative approach. Shazir Yusuf, yeah, you raised hands.
Ma'am, if you are sharing, if you are referring any slide, can you just show to us so it will be helpful for us?
Okay, so no, there are no slides here per se, but with the notes and other things, probably you'll be able to receive it.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, there's one more question here. Okay, I think I've missed out on too much of questions. I'm sure there must be recorded. Yeah, sure, Gauri. The recording sessions will also be available to you. I'm so sorry, Lawrence. We do not have a PPT here. Yeah, okay. I think I somehow I just missed out the messages. Okay. Yeah, so the Fielding's narrative approach, the novel employs a comic epic style, blending humor with social commentary. The comic solution reflects Fielding's choice to resolve conflicts through a lens that exposes societal absurdities and celebrates individual resilience. Then there is a success or failure of the author as a critical point that the novel nourishes. So, evaluating whether Fielding succeeds or fails depends on perspective. While some may argue that his satire and critique of societal norms are effective, others might feel disappointed by the lack of definite answers or resolutions to the deeper questions which is posed by the narrative. Now, let's understand in greater details. Here we talk about the problematic nature of Square Allworthy. There's this character. Um, there's a very thoughtful critique of Tom Jones that raises key questions about social structures and moral authority or narrative resolution. Is the comic solution Fielding offers a success or failure? That is what we need to unpack. And as we unpack, we come to know there are several layers of meanings in the novels, especially through the roles of characters like Tom Jones and Squire Allworthy. And we can also focus here on Fielding's method of resolution. At the first glance, the comic resolution, Tom's eventual reunion with Sophia, another character, and restoration of his status seems to tie things up in a very traditional, even conservative, fashionable manner. However, this resolution is deeply ionic and must be evaluated in the context of novel's broader critique of social and moral systems. It could have been as a success if at all Fielding's satirical method, which is deliberately use which deliberately uses comedy and not just simply to avoid difficult questions but to expose hypocrisy, particularly within the church, the patriarchy, and the landed aristocracy. There are characters like Blifil, Square, and Thwackum who are exaggerated figures used to mock the rigid moralism and self interest of the powerful. By having them defeated, Fielding symbolically critiques the status quo. The ionic tone throughout the novel, especially when Allworthy misjudges others, suggests that human judgment is fallible and moral absolutism is dangerous. Fielding champions reason, kindness, and tolerance, core Enlightenment ideals. These are the core Enlightenment ideals, even if he does not always show them succeeding cleanly in the plot. Fielding may be constrained by the genre expectations of his time. A tragic or unresolved ending might not have been expected by readers or publishers. Therefore, the comic ending acts as a compromise, masking the unresolved tensions beneath a humorous surface. The social energy, that is, Tom's natural vitality, generosity, and openness, is meant to challenge the repressive structures. Even if the system isn't overthrown, the survival and success of Tom suggest a hopeful model of humanity succeeding over hypocrisy. The status quo remains intact despite the satire, the agents of privilege remain largely unpunished or unchanged. The final restoration of Tom to Allworthy's good graces and his marriage to Sophia reaffirms the same property and patriarchal values the novel seems to critique. While Allworthy is a good man, his aloofness, paternalism, and detachment reflect the limitations of Enlightenment rationalism. His frequent misjudgments highlight a disconnect between abstract morality and real world complexity. The resolution is personal, not political. Tom's success does not lead to a broader transformation of society. The oppressive systems like patriarchy, economic inequality, rigid moralism are merely bypassed and not dismantled. By offering a comic ending, Fielding arguably sidesteps the deeper contradictions he raises throughout the novel. Readers may feel dismayed that after posing such serious questions, the novel settles for a romantic resolution that offers no real solution. So, if it is a success or a failure, perhaps the answer is that it is both. Fielding uses comedy, which is succeeding, and in revealing the cracks and contradictions of society, mocking those in power, uplifting natural goodness, and inviting readers to question moral and social assumption. But if it fails or a failure, or rather chooses not to propose a radically different world, the social energy embodied in Tom is celebrated but not systematically empowered. There is the case of philosopher and the clergyman and their comic nature. So this is again a very thoughtful critique of Tom Jones that focuses on the comic portrayal and moral failure of Square and Thwackum and how their role shapes the development of Tom's moral education. When Allworthy entrusts Tom's moral and intellectual upbringing to Square and Thwackum, it is an ionic moment in the narrative. Fielding uses these characters not as sincere mentors, but as mentioned earlier, exaggerated parodies of philosophical and religious dogma. Their failure to Truly Guide, Tom reveals much about the hollowness of the systems they represent. Square claims to represent reason, logic, and secular virtue. He espouses ideals like justice and moral rectitude, often cloaking himself in the language of classical philosophy. However, his reason is detached from compassion, and he proves hypocritical, especially in moments when self interest overrides his stated principles. His aesthetic rationalism lacks emotional depth and genuine moral commitment, exposing the limits of enlightenment thinking when ungrounded in empathy. Thokum is seen as a religious bigot. Thokum represents authoritarian Christianity, dogmatic, violent, and punitive. He insists on strict obedience and moral discipline, often resorting to physical punishment as a means of moral instructions. His version of religion is void of love and grace, reducing Christian teaching to a mechanism of control. Fielding's comic strategy uh, are absurd, self important, and constantly bickering despite their supposed roles as moral guides. Fielding uses their pretentious debates and petty squabbles to satirize the institutions of education, religion, and moral philosophy. Rather than offering clarity to Tom, they create confusion. Their teachings are more about ideological performance than sincere moral development. The pairing of Square and Thwakum illustrates how institutions meant to guide youth often become self serving and corrupt. Allworthy, despite his wisdom, errs in assigning them the task. This reflects the detachment, reinforcing the critique of his Enlightenment idealism. Tom receives no real moral nourishment from them. Instead, his growth stems from experience, emotion, error, and ultimately a kind of instinctive goodness. Fielding is not simply mocking individuals but critiquing broader systems, the failure of rationalist philosophy where it forgets human compassion, the dangers of dogmatic religion when it loses sight of kindness and love. The failure reinforces the novel's deeper theme that is true morality, which cannot be imposed through doctrine alone. It must be lived, felt, and tasted in real life. There is a symbol of natural goodness that is represented by Tom, who is a natural man who is inherently kind, generous, and morally sound, not because of any societal code, religion, or training, but because of his nature. This quality aligns him with the idea of Rousseau's novel Savage, though Fielding precedes Rousseau. He does good instinctively and not philosophically. His actions often put him in conflict with established norms, revealing how society punishes rather than rewards natural virtue. Tom's lack of adherence to rigid codes does not make him immoral. It underscores how external rules often lack connection to internal truth. Tom's treatment of women without domination symbolizes a proto feminist or humanist stance that defies his patriarchal context. He interacts with women as equals, regardless of class or background. His behavior resists the gendered scripts of masculinity. He does not assert control, dominance, or emotional detachment. He embodies what the analysis calls the human rather than the male, a character who integrates qualities typically gendered feminine like compassion, honesty, emotional openness, alongside strength and courage. This gives him a wholeness of character rare in the world that divides virtues and roles by gender. Tom is not naive in the sense of ignorance, but innocent in the sense of uncorrupted. He cannot conceive of acting under narrow motives like profit, deceit, or social climbing. This makes him vulnerable, yet also marks him as ethically superior to those around him. He is a hero, he is a symbol of the idealized human potential. He is he is someone where which symbolizes innocence over experience, nature over social conditioning, equality over hierarchy, wholeness over fragmentation. So this is all about Tom, that is in Unit 2. We move to Unit 3, which are the thematic areas in Tom Jones. Most of them are already covered in Unit 2 as we were discussing about the important aspects and the character of Tom. However, there are varieties of female representation also, and we are going to focus on that. This becomes one of the themes in Tom Jones. There is a female agency, you can call it, in a patriarchal world. Despite her plain appearance and limited desirability by conventional standards, Bridget, the character that we are talking about, asserts agency within a male dominated world. She does not conform passively to the role that her society has designated for women, like objects of marriage or morality or male control. She understands the motives of her suitors, some of them like Captain Bliffle, Square, and Wakum, who see her as a path to wealth and influence. So rather than being exploited, she flips the dynamic by using their ambition to further her own goals, notably through marriage and inheritance. This presents a comedy but sharp subversion of the traditional victim narrative often associated with women in literature of the time. Then Bridget is also the first woman in the novel to break the code of matrimonial sanctity, something that society, especially characters like Mr. Allworthy, claim to revere. Her secret childbirth and refusal to disclose the paternity of Tom Jones destabilizes the very system of legitimacy, inheritance, and sexual propriety that sustains patriarchal control. Her actions mirror the hypocrisy at the heart of society, that those who claim to uphold morality, like Allworthy, are surrounded by and in some ways complicit in moral contradictions. Through Bridget, Fielding introduces the theme of concealed transgression, that is, the idea that even those within the privileged classes violate the very rules they enforce on others. There is another theme of intelligence and strategy as survival tools. Bridget does not rebel with force or drama. Instead, she operates with discretion, calculation, and emotional intelligence. Her education and social standing protect her from open scandal. She acts strategically, knowing exactly how much to give and withhold, especially in managing men like Square and Twakum, who are morally bankrupt in private despite their public positions. One of the most ionic elements is that Bridget's choices shape the entire plot, even though she dies early. Tom Jones, the illegitimate child she hides, becomes the moral and narrative center of the novel. In a twist, the shameful act of a woman becomes the source of moral renewal as Tom's journey explores the true nature of virtue and growth. Bridget's planned violation thus undermines the patriarchal ideal of purity and replaces it with complexity, resilience, and human fallibility, qualities that ultimately redeem the story rather than corrupt it. The final line, her actions can be appreciated comically and heroically, is crucial. Comically, because her manipulations expose the hypocrisy of supposedly moral men. Heroically, because she challenges the system from within using the limited tools society allows women: wit, secrecy, and social positioning. Fielding recognizes all these characters in Bridget as a prototype of a woman who resists oppression not by rebellion but by outsmarting her oppressors. So, Bridget is one of the important characters. Next is Molly C. Green, who is a symbol of vital, natural sexuality. Molly is portrayed as bold, unashamed, and physically assertive, making her a rare figure in 18th century literature. She represents sexual energy as a natural force, unconstrained by decorum or social expectations. Fielding's comedy does not mock her but celebrates her vitality, even when it's excessive. Her lack of prudishness contrasts directly with the moral hypocrisy of others and with the sentimental purity found in Richardson novels like Pamela or Clarissa. Molly is described in animalistic terms and not dehumanizingly, but as a way of emphasizing her raw primal connection to nature, unmediated by hypocrisy. There is another character, Lady Bellaston, who is Mrs. Waters. She's the symbol of corrupted sexuality. In stark contrast, Lady Bellaston represents sexuality devoid of emotional authenticity, not natural or empowering, but strategic, manipulative, and emotionally hollow. She uses sex as a tool in power games, devoid of warmth or vulnerability. Her planned transactional approach to intimacy reduces it to routinized behavior, robbing it of spontaneity or meaning. The result, Tom himself loses vitality in her presence. His gusto and dynamism fade, suggesting that her influence is morally and emotionally draining. The moral and narrative function of the comparison, whether it is Molly and Lady Bellaston together, they offer us a very spectrum of female sexuality, ranging from natural and instinctive to calculated and corrupt. But neither is simply vilified or sanctified. Molly, though socially marginal, is morally more authentic. Her faults, like jealousy and impulsiveness, are human, not hypocritical. Lady Bellaston, though socially powerful, is morally empty. Her sexuality is not empowering but parasitic, draining others for her amusement or control. There is another character, Sophia, who is considered to be the moral compass. Sophia acts as the moral and emotional judge of these sexual dynamics. Her instinctive rejection of Tom after discovering his involvement with Lady Bellaston is significant. She intuits the difference between natural sexual energy, which she might forgive, and corrupted moral laxity, which she cannot. Her final acceptance of Tom is based on a moral revelation, not naivety, showing her as both principled and forgiving, a heroine with depth and dignity, not mere chastity. So, these are some of the themes in Unit 4, sorry, Unit 3. Unit 4 has the characters, and Unit 4 is termed as characters of the characterization. Characters here are considered as the social beings. There are fictional characters who are molded after real people. They reflect human and social realities. Author here provides details about age, appearance, habits, and relationships. But the characters come alive when they speak and act. Once they start speaking in the first person, they are freed from pure description and become agents of the plot. So, uh, the character uh, considering the unity and the individuality of the literary work here, the characters here represent the oneness of the literature. By oneness of literature, it's meant as a literary work which is complete and unified whole, much like a living organism. So, trying to study only one part like character or theme while ignoring others may in fact distort the meaning. Hence, this is compared to murdering the book. So, unlike philosophy, which can be broken down into logical sections, literature evokes an emotional and aesthetic unity. So, we still have to focus on parts, for example, character or symbolism. Here, what happens generally is readers they naturally notice certain aspects more than others, which are characters, symbols, the endings, etc. And let's start with the critical reading as a personal engagement in order to understand what exactly can be characters supposed to be. Dividing a novel into aspects, for example, plot, character, symbol, it helps us to understand it critically, but these divisions are artificial. The real unity of the book lies in the author's purpose, which ties all elements together. Hence, the unity of literary work lies in the author's personal response to the world, which is social, can be cultural, can be emotional. But readers must dissect this whole, even if temporarily, to understand the work better. Uh, it's important to understand the difference between a common reader and a critic in literary interpretation. Otherwise, reading or the writing does not carry any sensual value. Who can be a common reader? A common reader can be anyone who is educated as a general audience, may not be a literary scholar or a critic, whose approach towards literary work is not through analysis of techniques but by relating it to real life, especially contemporary issues. For them, literature often carries a very clear message or social commentary. Who can be a critic or a special reader? Anyone who focuses on textual, the stylistic and the linguistic features, what the passage calls the internal areas of a work, which can be influenced by Western traditions. These special readers separate literature from politics, philosophy, or ideology. These readers avoid discussing the message of literature, viewing it as the domain of political or ideological discourse and not literary criticism. Now, can we ignore the message? The authors question here whether the third world societies, where poverty and inequality are still widespread, can afford the luxury of purely academic interpretation. For people in such societies, literature must remain engaged with real social, economic, and political conditions. The message or social relevance of literature is essential and cannot be ignored. So, Raymond Williams and the role of literature, who is a Marxist cultural critic, insisted that literature must be firmly placed in society. This means that literature cannot be isolated from the world, it must be seen as part of the social and cultural fabric. Now, here, when we come to understand the point of view in Fielding, we come to understand that Fielding's clear authorial voice, unlike many novelists, is not neutral or hidden behind the story. He opens his opinions about characters and social issues as strongly as sharply as directly and guided by moral judgment. Fielding uses a comic mode to express all his characters, to ridicule, to irony, to satire. Even when being funny, he never leaves readers uncertain about what he stands for. Characters who are morally corrupt or socially harmful, these are clearly exposed and mocked, while his narrative includes dramatic events and humor. Fielding's remarks or commentary carry the most insight. In short, Fielding points of view is never ambiguous. Through a mix of comic techniques and serious commentary, he shapes the reader's understanding of characters. His goal is not just to entertain, but to promote virtuous living and social awareness. He talks about an individual character. Now, there are two interpretations of individuality. First is the psychological and emotional realism, which emphasizes emotional depth, sensuousness, and psychological insight. The reader identifies with the character's thoughts, feelings, and internal struggles. This form of individuality gives authenticity and human richness to the character. Then there is a uh, second interpretation of individuality, which is mostly within the social context. The better understanding of individuality here involves seeing the specific historical or social phenomena in which a character is embedded. Fielding's characters may not always feel psychologically deep, but they reflect the precise conditions of their world. Their individuality arises from how they relate to, resist, or embody the society they live in. So, these are some of the important characteristics of the characters which are presented in Tom Jones Fielding's Tom Jones. So we take a break here of 2 minutes, and we will be back to carry on with the next 4 units. So it's exactly 3:30. We begin at 3:32. 2 minutes for you. Let's begin with the next unit. This is Unit 5, Artistic Unity or Socio-Cultural Concerns. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones challenges conventional expectations of novelistic structure, particularly through the inclusion of the 18th through all the chapters that precede each of the book in the novel. At the first glance, these essays may appear as digressive authorial intrusions, seemingly disconnected from the forward movement of the narrative. Critics like Ian White argue that such elements diminish the authenticity of the narrative, undermining the illusion of realism. Yet to dismiss them as irrelevant or extraneous is to miss their larger function, both artistically and ideologically. And this helps in shaping the novel's unique identity. Let's first understand the surface objection that these essays are unnecessary because they do not contribute directly to the plot. This argument rests on the assumption that the novel must adhere to a streamlined plot driven model. one concerned solely with a straight description of events. By this standard, Fielding's reflective, often philosophical interludes are judged as distractions, aesthetic clutter that interferes with narrative efficiency. However, this is a narrow understanding of the novel, one that prioritizes linear storytelling over intellectual engagement. Fielding's introductory chapters, far from being random or self indulgent, serve as critical frameworks through which the reader is invited to interpret the events of the novel. The topics ranging from the purpose of serious writing, of the nature of love, the duties of critic, and the art of storytelling itself act as a thematic overtures that echo throughout the subsequent chapters. In doing so, they enrich the reading experience by opening up philosophical and ethical dimensions that the plot alone cannot fully explore, and what himself concedes that few readers would wish to be without the prefatory chapters. His ambivalence captures the tension between narrative realism and authorial presence in Fielding's method. Unlike Richardson, who aimed to dissolve the author's presence in favor of emotional immersion and immediacy, Fielding positions himself as both narrator and moral guide, constantly reminding the reader of the constructed nature of the story. His voice is didactic, ironic, and conversational, insisting on a direct relationship with the reader. To remove these essays would be to erase Fielding's presence as a narrator, diminishing the sense of intellectual championship that is essential to the novel's charm and function. Fielding's essays reflect his conviction that literature must serve a dual purpose, to delight and to instruct. This was a guiding principle for many 18th century writers like Swift, Pope, and Johnson, who saw their role as a public intellectual responsible for guiding the moral and cultural life of nation. Fielding's prefatory chapters position the novel as a vehicle of social commentary, not merely a form of escapist entertainment. For him, the novel is a place where religion, politics, morality, aesthetics, and human psychology intersect. Fielding takes the role not just of a storyteller but of public educator. He writes with the conviction that the reader needs help in navigating the complexities of moral life. The essays serve to equip the reader intellectually, preparing them to understand the motives and actions of character, to distinguish between hypocrisy and virtue, and to engage in moral reasoning. They function as a kind of ethical scaffolding, allowing the reader to judge the narrative with more than just instinct or emotion, with reflection, principle, and wit. This is particularly significant in a novel like Tom Jones, which engages deeply with social structures, class, gender, inheritance, education, and the law, and the moral dilemmas, deceit, generosity, sexual freedom, and repentance. Rather than leaving these to be implicitly resolved by the plot, Fielding foregrounds them in his essays, ensuring that the reader is alert to the stake of the narrative. To frame the issue as a choice between artistic unity and socio-cultural concern is to set us all up a false dichotomy. Fielding's Tom Jones achieves a distinctive kind of artistic unity, one that includes, rather than excludes, essayistic reflection, the interweaving of narrative and commentary, fiction and philosophy, character and critic, constitutes a novelistic form in which form and function coalesce around the author's purpose to present a history that instructs, entertains, and challenges. Thus, the introductory chapters are not interpretations but integral components of Fielding's aesthetics. They serve to maintain an author reader relationship built on trust, wit, and shared inquiry. And far from undermining the reality of the narrative, they emphasize that the world of Tom Jones, like our very own, must be understood not just by what happens, but by how we think about what happens. That is Fielding's most important lesson, and the essays are his ways of teaching it. The Man of the Hill episode in the book, often dismissed by modern critics as an unnecessary episode, and which is in fact central to the moral, structural, and thematic architecture of Tom Jones. It functions not merely as a diversion from the main plot, but as a reflective and contrastive mirror to Tom's own character and development, offering insight into 18th century social realities, moral dilemmas, and Fielding's philosophical vision of human nature and history. There are some of the key points in support of this argument. For example, the episode like The Man of the Hill, where Mrs. Fitzpatrick narrative or the gypsy encounter reveal behavioral tendencies, societal structure, and moral conflicts of the time. These episodes break the narrative finality, which offer alternative moral trajectories for Tom and others. Fielding plays with the dual meaning of story, subjective narrative, and history, objective record. The Man of the Hills narrative is both his personal justification and social history, embedding a subjective account within a larger historical context. The old man has retreated from society due to illusionment, while Tom remains in the world, engaging and learning from it. Here, there is a thematic contrast between isolation versus engagement. This contrast underlines Fielding's preferences for active moral engagement over cynical withdrawal. Both men experience betrayal, have familial conflicts, and suffer deeply. However, their responses differ. This is where we talk about the moral and the experiential parallel with Tom. The man of the hill chooses seclusion and pessimism. Tom chooses continued struggle, learning, and growth. Tom sees the man as a potential future self offering a moral cautionary tale. What can be Tom's moral response is the key to uh, Man of the Hill's misanthropy. Tom sees individual failings as accidents, not evidence of universal depravity. His defense of human nature reflects an optimistic and reformist worldview, more in line with Fielding's vision of moral progress and Christian humanism. The Man of Hill episode is far from a narrative digression, epic moment of reflection providing both the reader and Tom with a philosophical counterpoint to Tom's journey. Through contrast, Fielding's present an ethical blueprint for living, not through isolation and misanthropy, but through engagement, resilience, and moral learning. Tone and symbolism in the Man's of the Hill speech, like the homely houses and the image of nature with bestowing gifts to our savage brothers of the creation, these words evoke a pastoral, idealized vision of innocence and purity. The old man speaks with an air of uncorrupted righteousness, implying that the moral decay lies not in the natural world but in humankind. His tone carries the rising of the pristine sincerity, suggesting authenticity and moral conviction, even if misdirected. However, this sincerity is tinged with bitterness and withdrawal from society. His disillusionment represents a philosophical stance, one of retreat, cynicism, and moral absolutism, stemming from his lived experience in a harsher, earlier historical era. Tom Jones' response is also marked by both intellectual struggle and moral confidence. While he agrees with parts of Old Man's sentiment, he challenges the sweeping condemnation of mankind. His speech reveals recognition of complexity, where Tom does not deny that evil exists but argues against universalizing it. He suggests that many who do wrong are not inherently evil. Often their actions result from accident rather than innate depravity. Tom emphasizes judging humanity by its best representatives, not its worst, a direct critic of the old man's essentialism. This echoes Enlightenment ideals where reason and moral progress are achievable and central to human nature. His assertion that only those who find depravity in their own minds can claim human nature is inherently evil is a deft moral turning point. He implies the old man's bitterness is not truly justified by universal truth, but by personal trauma. The generational gap, which is about 60 years between Tom and the man of the hill, is historically significant. Old man's time was one of the political time of one of the political turmoil, restoration excesses, religious persecution, and instability. Whereas Tom's era reflects early enlightenment, optimism, expanding commerce, and shifting social norms. This temporal difference and all underscores why their worldviews diverge. The old man's is shaped by betrayal and instability, while Tom navigates a world that, although morally ambiguous, holds possibilities for redemption and balance. So, this is Unit 5. We're over with Unit 5, three more to go. This is Unit 6, and this is Feminist Concerns in Fielding. In Tom Jones, Henry Fielding's exploration of gender dynamics and marriage reveals an early yet perceptive engagement with what we today might call feminist concerns. Central to his exploration is Fielding's depiction of marriage, which is not romantic or emotional, ideal, but a socio-economic contract that tends to diminish the individuality and agency of women. Throughout the novel, marriage emerges more as a transaction shaped by power, property, and inheritance than a bond between equals. This is evident in how characters such as Blifil brothers pursue marriage as a means to secure wealth or status rather than love. The attempted pairing of young Blifil with Sophia perfectly illustrates this idea. He is considered a suitable match solely on the grounds that he is the presumptive heir of Mr. Allworthy's estate. Sophia's clear and unwavering dislike for him is of little consequence to the society that sees such a union as ideal. Conversely, Tom Jones' deep emotional bond with Sophia lacks legitimacy in the eyes of others simply because Tom, as a foundling, has no financial security or family name to offer. Fielding is acutely aware of the consequences of the marriage system for women, particularly under the prevailing conduct code. This code dictates how a married woman must behave and what roles she is expected to play, effectively erasing her individuality. A married woman is stripped of her name, her freedom to make decisions, her voice in public affairs, and her right to express dissent or pursue her desires. This suppression is tragically exemplified in the character of Squares Weston's wife, who dies early in the novel. Her life within marriage was so devoid of real emotional connection or mutual respect, that death becomes almost a release. Fielding, through this example, exposes the hollowness of a marriage built on domination and neglect, suggesting that the very framework of such unions stifles women more than men. Interestingly, Fielding contrasts this repression within marriage with the freedom and assertiveness women exhibit outside of it. Characters like Molly Seagram and Jenny Jones represent a version of female sexuality that is bold, unashamed, and entirely outside the purview of institutional control. Molly is no mere flirt, she is an initiator, a seductress who takes what she wants and confronts the consequences head on. Her sexuality is not sentimentalized or moralized. Instead, Fielding represents her as a kind of natural force, flawed, perhaps both honest and sincere in her desires. The philosopher found hiding half naked in her bed becomes a figure of comic hypocrisy, preaching virtue while indulging in the very passions he claims to condemn. In contrast, Molly's unapologetic expression of desire seems mostly admirable or at least refreshingly real. Similarly, Jenny Jones' relationship with Tom is marked by mutual interest and responsiveness. While society may disapprove, Fielding does not cast judgment on these women. Instead, he uses them to demonstrate that female sexuality, when freed from the constraining institution of marriage, can be active, conscious, and self directed. Nevertheless, Fielding does not fully endorse this unrestrained model of sexuality either. Through the character of Sophia, he also constructs a vision of female desire that is more introspective and idealistic. Sophia's journey towards love is not immediate or instinctual, but unfolds through a series of uncertainties, moral reflections, and emotional longings. She desires a partner who respects her as an equal and with whom she can build a meaningful relationship. Her idea of love does not align with reckless abandon, but seeks a different kind of moral code, a framework in which passion is tempered by trust, mutual regard, and shared values. Tom Jones' own character development is key to this vision. Tom's sexuality, unlike that of other men in the novel, is portrayed with emotional depth and sincerity. His first experience with intimacy comes through Molly Seagram and later with Jenny Jones, both of whom are women outside institution of marriage. These experiences awaken not only Tom's physical desires but also his emotional sensitivity. What makes Tom different from other male characters is his capacity for empathy, his willingness to admit faults, his desire to treat women as equals in affection and respect. He is not predatory like Blifil, who objectifies Sophia in his fantasies, nor is he emotionally closed off like Mr. Alworthy or obsessed with masculine pursuits like Square Weston. Tom's gentleness and sense of gratitude towards women reflect qualities more traditionally attributed to female characters in literature, creating an important counterpoint to the critical male archetype. In Fielding's depiction, other men lack any true understanding of sexuality. Mr. Alworthy, though morally upright and intellectually impressive, cannot form meaningful emotional connections with women. Thwackum and Square are rigid moralists whose abstract principles have no space for messiness of human emotions and sexual desire. Blifil sees women as passive recipients of male attention, a view that reduces female agency to nothing. By contrast, Tom and Sophia's eventual union presents a tentative step towards a kind of a relationship which is based on learning, growth, and mutual constructions of values. Their love is not perfect or complete, but it is rooted in an ongoing effort to create a shared moral space where naturalness is not suppressed but guided towards something higher. Fielding does not offer simple solutions to the tensions he identifies. Rather, he explores the contradictions and limitations of his society with irony and empathy. While he does not fully escape the patriarchal assumption of his time, his portrayals of female characters, especially Molly, Jenny, and Sophia, who demonstrate a willingness to question those assumptions and imagine new possibilities. Fielding recognizes that true sexual and emotional freedom cannot exist within existing structures unless those structures themselves are reimagined. In Tom and Sophia's eventual partnership, Fielding hints at a new model of love, one built not on domination or repression, but on shared humanity, mutual effort, and the hope of transformation. Thus, Fielding's feminist concerns, while never stated as a political doctrine, are deeply embedded in the moral and emotional fabric of Tom Jones. Through his depiction of marriage, sexuality, and personal freedom, he critiques the system that constrains women and suggests tentatively but powerfully that another way might be possible. In Fielding's novel, pregnancy is also an aspect. Pregnancy functions as both a narrative catalyst and a profound metaphor, offering a sharp critique of 18th century gender relations and social morality. Henry Fielding uses pregnancy not merely as a plot but as a thematic and structural core through which the novel interrogates the inequalities and hypocrisies of a patriarchal society. More importantly, the burden of pregnancy, as portrayed in the novel, falls squarely and exclusively on women, exposing a world where biological realities are weaponized to perpetuate social subjugation. From the outset, the entire novel is predicated upon an act of pregnancy outside wedlock. Tom Jones is introduced as a foundling, an illegitimate child left anonymously on Mr. Alworthy's bed. The reader's first encounter with Tom is just famed with the context of social judgment against female sexuality. At this point, Fielding already signals the societal tendency to stigmatize the women involved while allowing the man to escape scrutiny. Summer, the father of Tom, disappears into background. His name is only revealed later. Bridget Allworthy, that is Tom's mother, must carry not only the biological burden but also the social shame, which leads her to conspire with Jenny Jones to cover up the truth. Jenny takes the blame for the pregnancy, exemplifying the self sacrificial role that women are often forced to play under the moral gaze of society. Bridget's decision to conceal her pregnancy is not just a personal choice born of fear, it is emblematic of a broader cultural repression of female autonomy. Fielding critiques this moral order by dramatizing the extreme lengths to which women must go to preserve their reputations. Jenny's banishment, despite her innocence, and her unflinching loyalty to Bridget expose the injustice of a society that expects women to bear pain and dishonor in silence. Bridget, though from an upper class background, is no exception. Her fear of disgrace is so potent that it overrides any maternal instinct or moral hesitation. So, pregnancy in Tom Jones thus becomes a metaphor for the burdens that women must silently carry, both physical and societal. Fielding's structural use of pregnancy goes deeper still. The pregnancy of Bridget does not just initiate the plot, it shapes the very architecture of the novel. Tom's illegitimacy is not incidental, it is the defining feature of his character. Every experience Tom has, every perception others hold of him, and every moral dilemma he faces is rooted in this foundational event. Thus, Fielding embeds pregnancy into the narrative framework to reflect how deeply the social order is implicated in defining identity, legitimacy, and morality through women's reproductive roles. So, this is about Unit 6. We'll start with Unit 7. Unit 7 is about some opinions on Tom Jones. The limitations of modern criticism when approaching Tom Jones highlights a central tension in literary studies today. The prioritization of formalist and structural analysis over thematic, ideological, and moral engagement. Indeed, while many modern critics delve deeply into Fielding's irony, narrative voice, and intricate structure of his plot, they often sidestep the larger question: what is Fielding really saying about the world? What is his attitude towards society, morality, and human nature? And how does Tom Jones act not just as a literary artifact but as a cultural intervention? Fielding's Tom Jones is not merely a technical masterpiece. It is a novel rooted in a vivid moral vision and steeped in historical consciousness. Yet, the irony is that modern criticism, particularly post structuralist and formalist readings, tends to fragment that vision, focusing on narrative architecture while neglecting the ideological framework that gives it meaning. Fielding becomes in readings. Yeah, so Fielding becomes in readings a very clever technician, not a thinker engaged in the social debates of his time. In earlier or traditional criticism, especially during the late 18th and 19th centuries, there was still a sense that literature, including Fielding's, conveyed values. Critics saw Fielding such as moralist, a humanist, a promoter of goodness and benevolence. They acknowledged that Fielding's characters and plots were grounded into ethical discourse. Tom Jones was read not simply as a comic picaresque but as a novel about virtue tested by the real world, where hypocrisy, lust, greed, and social pretension are challenged by innocence, generosity, and self awareness. Modern criticism, especially from mid 20th century onwards, has often jettisoned this lens. Instead, it dwells on narratology, analyzing how the story is told rather than what it seeks to say. Concepts such as the unreliable narrator, metafiction, voice, and focalization dominate. These tools are undoubtedly useful, but they are too often that ends in themselves rather than means to understanding a larger social, philosophical, or moral worldview. For example, Fielding's irony is frequently discussed in technical terms: how he manages irony, how it creates distance between author and character, how it destabilizes the narrative. But rarely in Fielding's irony read as a tool for social critique, as a way of exposing the absurdities and hypocrisies of aristocratic life, religious sanctimony, or patriarchal structures. Modern criticism often dissects Fielding's technique without asking, what is Fielding being ironic about? And why does it matter? Likewise, Tom Jones' famous structure It perfectly balanced itself in 18 book form, often compared to classical epic, receives scholarly admiration but with minimal interest in what that structure symbolizes. Does the structure reflect a belief in order amidst chaos? A moral balance is a disorderly world, a comic reaffirmation of providence. These are the questions which earlier critics asked, but modern criticism often avoids. This problem is compounded by the fact that Fielding is a deeply ideological writer. He's engaged in debates about justice, law, gender, class, religion, human reason. He creates characters like Tom, Sophia, Blifil, Alworthy, not just as devices, but as embodiments of different ethical and social philosophies. Tom's journey is not merely narrative, it is moral and intellectual. It develops in the form of learning shaped by experience, misjudgment, empathy, and growth. When modern criticism fails to see this dimension, it misses the point of the novel itself. This is not to dismiss modern criticism outright. Its tools have enriched our understanding of the novel's complexity, self awareness, and formal innovation. But it has too often lost sight of literature as communication between author and reader, as moral discourse, and as historical argument. Fielding's Tom Jones deserves to be read not only as an artistic construction but as a cultural weapon aimed at real injustices or hypocrisies or illusion of this time. So, when you ask why irony and plot structure, why not social criticism and an alternative moral intellectual stance, you'll come to know that we are deeply dissatisfied. Tom Jones is not just a well made novel, it is a vision of how to live, how to think, how to judge human conduct in a deeply flawed world. Any criticism that forgets this risks reducing a vital, engaged, and daring work into a mere literary puzzle, represents a sophisticated and thoughtful critic to interpret ideas into a more continuous exposition, bringing out the critical argument more explicitly while integrating deeper commentary. So, this is about Unit 7. We come to the end of Block 1. This is Unit 8. Unit
Uh,
8 is narration in fiction and third world references. So, here we are going to talk about Fielding's narrative voice, authorial intrusion, and irony. Fielding as narrator maintains a distinct and highly intrusive presence in Tom Jones. The narrator frequently addresses the reader directly, often using the first person I to express moral, social, or literary commentary. This narrator is didactic, often offering lessons on virtue, human nature, or art. Ironical, especially in dealing characters like Square and Thwackum. Self conscious, sometimes even mocking the art of novel writing itself. Now, this narrative strategy is both stylistic and ideological. It asserts authorial control while also mediating the reader's interpretation. The narrator is one voice of moral authority, the other is Quare Allworthy, who appears as the novel's moral touchstone, who is generous, fair-minded, and rational. However, both voices are problematic from a post-colonial or third world standpoint. The narrator claims neutrality, or benevolence, but often defends an aristocratic, patriarchal social order. Allworthy embodies the enlightened gentleman, but he too supports a conservative idea of justice, ultimately, one that upholds class and birth. From a modern or global South perspective, these voices may appear hegemonic, which claims universality for values that are in fact rooted in 18th century British class interests. The unit points out how characters like Square and Thackum are satirical stand ins for corrupted forms of religion and morality. Square, supposedly a man of reason and ethics, is exposed as hypocritical and self serving, especially in his relation with Bridget. Thwackum, who claims to defend religion, manipulates it to support the privileged, and attack the marginalized, which is Tom. Fielding's satire here undermines false morality, but his positive ideals remain vague. He uses the terms virtue and religion without fully defining them, as the passage notes. This raises a key interpretive problem. If all visible representations of virtue are exposed as false, what then is real virtue? Fielding seems to imply that it resides in natural goodness, such as that embodied by Tom Jones himself. But this is never given a philosophical grounding. Now, this part where we discuss about third world preferences, a narrative authority, it gestures towards a post colonial critic. Fielding's narrative strategy, with his centralized narrator and clear moralizing, reflects the values of colonial Enlightenment rationalism, a belief in universal moral truths dictated from above, a uh, a worldview where morality is defined and dispensed by the elite. In this context of third world or post colonial literature, these features may appear limiting or alienating. Many modern post colonial narratives resist intrusive narrators, preferring polyphonic or decentralized forms of storytelling. They emphasize moral ambiguity, lived experience, and voice plurality, featuring often missing in features which are often missing in Fielding's omniscient, confident narration. Ultimately, the Fielding narrator claims to be morally neutral but privileges certain ideologies like patriarchy, enlightenment rationality, critiques moral corruption but never questions the structures that enable such figures to hold moral authority, promotes a vision of virtue and religion that is idealized yet disconnected from concrete social injustices. A third world or decolonial reader might ask, where are the voices of the disposed? Is virtue a universal value or is it defined in class bound terms? Can the narrator's moral framework be applied in non Western, non elite contexts? Fielding's narration in Tom Jones is richly layered but also ideologically loaded. While it often satire and moral commentary, it does so from a privileged authoritative position that aligns with the interest of 18th century English elite. From a third world perspective, the novel's authorial voice can be seen as an example of narrative control that marginalizes dissenting or subaltern perspective. Thus, while the novel teaches us much about the ethics of narration, it also exposes the limits of Enlightenment humanism in grappling with more complex, diverse human realities. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones stands as a landmark in the history of English novel, not merely for its comic plot or characterization, but more importantly for its unique narrative, for its comments, for its the way it actively engages the reader's mind and moral judgment. This makes Fielding one of the earliest and most prominent examples of highly conscious narrator, a narrative presence that is self-aware, directive, and performative. In Tom Jones, Fielding treats narration as an act of performance. The novel can be read as a staged event, with Fielding as the master of ceremonies addressing a live audience. He appears aware of the audience expectations, assumptions, and even their likely emotional reactions. For example, the narrator intervenes frequently with remarks beginning with I, which establishes a conversational tone. This breaks the illusion of realism and forces the reader to reflect on the story rather than be absorbed in it passively. Several points, Field stops the narrative to explain his approach or justify a character's action. This gives the reader a sense that they are part of an unfolding debate or moral inquiry rather than passive recipients of entertainment. This anticipates later literary theories of reader response, where the reader's role in constructing meaning becomes central. Fielding actively involves the readers in the process of interpretation. Fielding's narrator is not merely a storyteller, but a moral philosopher and educator. His purpose is not just to amuse, but to instruct. He clearly sets himself apart from characters like Square and Thwackum, who pretend to embody virtue and religion, but in fact corrupt both. The narrator critiques these figures through irony and satire, suggesting that real virtue lies not in doctrinaire moralism but in practical wisdom, empathy, and good naturedness. Fielding thus offers a redefinition of morality, not one grounded in rigid codes, but in humanity and social intelligence. He uses characters like Tom Jones, who, although flawed, ultimately possess natural goodness to reinforce this point. The narrator is therefore not neutral but clearly aligned with set of values, those of moderation, honesty, and social harmony. Fielding articulates his theory of narration in his own words, particularly in the prefaces and authorial intrusions. He distinguishes between invention and judgment, which together constitutes genius. Fielding's invention is not about fabricating extravagant events, but about penetrating into the essence of reality. What is plausible, what is essentially human. His judgment lies in selecting and presenting material in a way that serves both aesthetic and moral ends. This shows that Fielding sees narration as a rational, intellectual process deeply tied to social critique and ethical guidance. Irony is one of Fielding's most potent narrative tools. It serves to disorient the reader, shake up conventional judgments, and force moral philosophical reflection. Irony in Tom Jones is often directed as figures of false authority, including moralists, clergymen, and aristocrats. This strategy undermines blind deference to tradition, urging the reader to examine situations critically and independently. In this way, Fielding cultivates the dialogic relationship with the reader. Irony becomes a way of sowing doubt, not to confuse, but to stimulate independent thought. Unlike later realist novels, which strive to immerse the reader fully into the fictional world, Fielding's narrator repeatedly breaks the spell of narrative immersion. He interrupts the flow with essays, digressions, prefaces, and moral reflections. These interruptions serve a purpose to keep the reader awake and critically engaged. This technique is akin to alienation effect, where the audience is intentionally distanced from the narrative in order to reflect, not just to feel. Fielding's novel thus becomes not just an emotional journey but a rational and ethical conversation between author and the reader. The narrator in Tom Jones enjoys immense freedom. He is not bound by strict chronology or naturalistic detail. He can manipulate events, introduce coincidences, or depart from the storyline altogether. This theoretical liberty is not a weakness but a part of Fielding's larger authorial control. The narrator is akin to a stage director, arranging events to suit the moral and aesthetic vision of the work. The story then is secondary to the experience it is meant to generate, a combination of pleasure, reflection, and insight. From the third world or post colonial standpoint, Fielding's narrative voice may be interpreted in complex ways. On one hand, it represents a paternalistic Enlightenment authority, a voice that claims to teach and moralize from a position of cultural superiority. On the other, the techniques of irony, moral scrutiny, and performative narration offer tools that third world writers have adopted and transformed. Writers like Salman Rushdie and Chinua Achebe similarly use narrators who are reflective, morally engaged, and self conscious, but they apply them to non European cultural and political realities. Fielding's narrative techniques are therefore transferable, though his ideological framework is rooted in 18th century British conservatism. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones is not just a novel of events, it is a novel of ideas, morals, and intellectual engagement. The narrator is central to the structure. He guides the reader through a comic yet morally serious world. He breaks immersion to encourage critical distance and ethical reflection. He exercises narrative authority not just to tell a story but to build a conversation with the audience. In this way, Fielding anticipates many modern narrative techniques and remains a vital figure in understanding how fiction can be both pleasurable and philosophical, entertaining and educative. So, this is all about Unit 8, and we are done with Block 1. We meet tomorrow again to discuss MEG-3, Block 2, and in Block 2, we deal with Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. So, this is,
Hello, Miss
yeah,
Vidyashi.
Saujanya is saying something. Yes, please.
Yeah, what is the syllabus for semester one?
For semester 1 syllabus, I think you have to write it to the office itself and they will be replying it.
Okay, the entire British poetry won't be there. British novel won't be there.
With more clarity, I think the office only can help you guide with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Padma, you have a question, please. Padma, you raised hands.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Ma'am,
Yes, please.
can we get the recorded video, ma'am, on LMS?
uh, yeah, I think they will definitely guide with that also. This video is recorded already. The
Okay,
session is
ma'am.
recorded for your benefit, so definitely they will be sharing that with all of you.
Okay, ma'am. Is it compulsory to attend all the classes, ma'am? Actually,
I
I'm an
think,
employee.
yeah, okay, I understand. I think this will be best guided by the office itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I sent a message through email, ma'am.
Mhm.
I've not got the reply.
Okay, let me see what I can do from my end. I can just ask them to, reflect to your queries.
Yes, ma'am. After
Yeah.
5, if it is possible, after 5, can you schedule these, ma'am, classes?
Uh, okay, let the office get back to you, huh?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Amit, yes, please.
Yeah, hello. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Yeah, ma'am, since this is online mode, where can we get the textbooks or reference books for our course, ma'am?
I think they will share with all of you the course structure and also it's already there in MEG-3 EGAN course if you find out there. It's all in details, it's all there.
Yeah, actually, the I have seen the soft copy, ma'am, but I wanted to get the hard copy of the books, uh,
So
curriculum
basically,
books.
there is no hard copy. What best students do is they take a printout of the units or the blocks that are covered. So there's no
Okay.
book available as such, if I'm correct to say in
Okay.
that way. However, all the unit ones details, say all the blocks details are already available in eGAN course in a scanned mode in PDF mode. So what
Yeah,
best
yeah,
you can
yeah.
do is you
That is.
can take a print out of it.
Yeah, so is it not possible to, if you write to email to Delhi center, so that they will dispatch the hard copy of the textbook, like for distance learning, how
Yeah, why
it is,
not?
made.
You can try that. You can try that, no problem. See if at all they can share some hard copies with you.
I mean,
Definitely.
yeah, in the orientation session, we were told that I was not sure. We were told that we could write to the center, Delhi center, and we need to pay. However, we need to pay some amount to get the books like that. So I want to
Books like
just
that.
confirm that. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
For all the core curriculum books.
Okay, okay.
But
I'm
I
not
have sent the
aware.
email to them. So just I want to confirm before.
Yeah, sure. You can please connect with the office. Maybe they can guide you with that too.
Okay, because the soft copy is always not convenient to read. That's why.
Ah, I understand. I understand because too much of screen presence and other things. No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
So that will.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Basitul Islam. I don't think so. Possibly. Changing of time may not be possible this semester. Maybe in the next semester you may. Anamika has a Anamika raised hand. Yes, Anamika.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good
Uh,
afternoon.
Ma'am, what type of questions will be asked in the exam from
Okay,
this?
what you can do is when you refer to the PDF which is available in eGAN course under each unit, there are few questions, typical questions, which is already they have summarized the entire write-up and they have come up with important questions. You can definitely refer to those, or else when we study a novel, important questions definitely come from the plot, the characters, the themes. Okay, and as and how that's the reason
Sure.
why when we are studying this British novel, every chapter or new author that we will be studying, they have their own set of characters and plot and other things described very well. So you can expect questions from each one of these units.
Okay.
Yeah. Sojourner, I'm not very sure about it. If I'm not very sure about the orientation session. Yeah. Donkara has a question. Donkara, you want to ask something? Okay, fine then. Thank you so much, all of you. We meet tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.